Okay, it's 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and so we are going to start. Hello everybody, my name is Corinne Joly from Higher Ed Experts. Welcome back to Admission Blogging 360 for this second webinar. Before introducing today's presenter, I'd like to make the usual announcements. First, a quick reminder that due to the fact that we are using voice over IP for the audio, you might notice some very small lagging from time to time. Nothing to worry about, as the audio will catch up after 2 to 3 seconds. Second, about question, we will have a Q&A just after the presentation, and I'd like you to type your question in the chat interface so we can answer as many as possible. Feel free to type them as they come to you, and they will all be answered at the end of the presentation. But now it's time to introduce our presenter for today. I'm delighted to welcome Ben Jones, Associate Director of Admissions for Communication and Recruitment at MIT. As you might know, MIT has invested a lot of energy and virtual real estate in its blogging program since it was first launched in 2004. Ben himself has been blogging for his admissions office for almost 3 years now, and that's why I invited him to present this second webinar. From admissions officer to admissions blogger, blogging to recruit the next generation. So I'm just going to unmute Ben and pass him the ball. So Ben, if you are ready, it's your turn now. Ben.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to the second week of this great conversation that we've been having on admissions blogging. Nancy did a great job last week talking about the student side of blogging for admissions, and I'm excited to get the torch and talk to you guys today mostly about staff blogging and how that complements a student blogging program. So without further ado, I will get to my first slide here. My introducing slide. Well, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been here at MIT for almost 4 years as the Director of Communications for the Admissions Office. My position was created when I signed on for the job, so I didn't have a previous person to look at and say, oh, okay, that's how it's done. So they sort of handed me the job and said, make it up as you go along, which was actually a lot of fun. It was a little scary at first, but it ended up being a lot of fun. MIT at the time had an admissions website that was designed in the 90s and looked very, very old and stale. And they, being the greatest technology school in the world, rightfully thought that this was a bad thing, and they wanted someone to come in and essentially revamp the whole site and tell MIT's story the right way. We didn't feel at the time like MIT's story was being told in a language that was really digestible by, is that even a word, digestible? Digestible by the target audience, which of course is college-bound high school students. MIT traditionally has done communications in a very sort of professional, journalistic way, and high school students can certainly read and appreciate that kind of content, but they weren't bonding with it. They felt that it was being written for a much older audience and wanted something a little more fun and in the spirit of being 17 and embracing the whole idea of the web, which is relatively new as far as admissions communications go. So I had about 10 years of experience. I was an English major in college, and as we all know, English majors sometimes don't fall right into jobs the easy way. So when the web was taking off, I thought, hey, this is a cool new thing. I'm going to get involved in this. And for many years, worked on web communities. I was a blogger myself. And when MIT said we need someone to tell the story of the school properly, it seemed like a great match for me. And I was really happy that they gave me the keys and said, don't get us in trouble, but do whatever you want to do. So that is how I came to be at MIT. The blogging part of the website was almost a happy accident. Back in 2004, when I first started, in May of 2004, the site that I inherited was designed to be sort of a magazine type of journal type of thing. We had set up blogs in the bottom right-hand corner, way below the scroll, so you had to really look for them. But an interesting thing happened. We launched the site, and noticed almost immediately that the blogs were getting all of the traffic. So in 05 and 06, we redesigned the site in-house to what you see now, and basically instead of having the blogs be the icing on the cake, we decided to make the blogs the cake itself. And we'll talk a lot about how that came to be throughout the presentation. So that is a brief introduction. Our site now has 2,000 blog entries and over 30,000 comments, responses to student and staff entries from prospective students. So it's kind of a big animal, which is currently a little bit of a headache for me because I need to move it to a more powerful server because there's just so much content that my little teeny server is not terribly happy with me. But I think that's a good problem to have. It's a measure of the success of the program. So here we go. What are you going to learn today? Well, I'm going to touch briefly on how the target audience, in other words, roughly ages 15 to 18, 15 to 19, how they like to communicate. I think it's very important to preface this whole conversation with a discussion of that, although I will keep that brief because Sam Jackson next week is going to tell you a lot more on that topic, and he's a much better expert than I on that since he is actually a member of the target audience. But I do want to talk briefly about that to give you a landscape on which to view the rest of my discussion. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I will tell you also the benefits and risks of launching an admissions blogging program, at least from my experience. I will hopefully convey to you the amount of work involved and what resources are needed, both in terms of man-hours and money. And last but not least, I'll tell you how to get started with your own blogging program if you decide that this is a good idea for your organization. So, to begin, understanding how this generation communicates. The first thing to realize is that the internet has always been a part of their lives. Most students that I speak with these days don't really remember life before the internet. So they look at the web somewhat differently than I do. I can remember a time when there was no web, when there wasn't even email. So I think of the web sort of as this separate space from real life. Whereas most students that I speak with tell me the web to them is really just an extension of real life. They don't make a distinction between the two. They use the web to facilitate real life interactions. And that is why Facebook and other social networking sites have become so popular, because those sites are really the best at facilitating real life interactions. An important thing to realize about this is people of my generation and of older generations make the mistake often of thinking of the web in terms of how they might think about a view book or a piece of print, whereas the students of this generation are thinking of the web more as what would happen if I was sitting across the table from an admissions officer. So if you spend all of your time marketing on the web the way you would in a view book, you have to think about it from the perspective of prospective college students. They are going to think that you're just a big marketing schmoozeball, which is not at all what they're going to relate to. I'm not saying marketing's bad in any way. It's certainly not, but there are right places for that. And on the web, you really just want to be the person who's sitting across the table from the students as opposed to someone who is writing in a view book to them. Students prefer to receive their information in real time. The web has enabled us to receive information much more quickly, and as a result of that, this generation is amazing at filtering what is useful to them out of what they are getting. So if they're getting hit with 5 different IM chat windows at the same time while trying to write a paper, they can actually look at the 5 windows, decide which conversations are important, which can be ignored. Whereas if I was sitting here trying to write a paper and had 5 chat windows going, I think my head might explode. So they are much more adept at managing content and information. We talked already about the Web 2.0 stuff, community-generated content, and the rise of things like MySpace, Facebook, YouTube. They believe very strongly in being part of the process, not being simply being the end recipient. So in the admissions process, whereas before there was this big sort of secret shield up between an admissions committee and the students applying to the institute, that no longer exists, and the expectation is that it won't exist. They really want to be part of their own process, which I think is a really great thing. And I think that colleges should really embrace that as well. And last but not least, they demand primary sources and credibility. Sam Jackson will tell you a great deal about that next week, and if you read his blog, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This generation ignores what they perceive as engineered marketing or spin. They want primary source stuff, they want credibility stuff, because frankly, if you don't give it to them, they will go find it somewhere else, as Nancy talked about last week. Next slide. So what can blogging do for you? It will certainly increase the number of applications you receive. My fancy little graph there, which I should point out is not to scale, so it's not quite as amazing as I've made it look there. Notice that it starts at 10,000, not at 0. But still, you can see the jump in applications we've had after being flat for the prior 6 years when we started really focusing on the blogging program. So it will increase the number of applications you receive. For us, this was because we finally got people to understand what MIT was all about and that it wasn't such a cold place as many assumed it was. It will also increase the quality of the applications you receive. By this I mean every school is looking for a certain match between institute and applicant. And telling a school story properly in primary source material will really help your students or your prospective students self-select. Students who maybe weren't considering your institution because they had the wrong impression of it will all of a sudden recognize that they are a good match to it and apply. And students who thought your institute might be the perfect place for them may realize, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it was. Maybe this isn't the best match for me. And that will save you from having to read an application that clearly has no business applying to your institution. It's been very helpful for us. And last but not least, it will increase your yield, and we'll talk later about why that is. However, having said that, all of the aforementioned things are really great, but they should not be your primary reasons for starting a blog. For one simple reason: if you start a blog only to benefit your own goals, your applicants will immediately see through it. Remember, we talked before about how wonderful this generation is at working through information and deciding what's real and what's not. And they will immediately see through it if you're doing it only for yourself. They'll declare it yet another annoying marketing tool, and they will reject it. So, what are the right reasons to blog? Well, first of all, blogging reduces stress and anxiety in the applicant pool because it shows applicants that their applications are in good and human hands. I've spoken with students who really thought that the selection committee at MIT was made up of a bunch of 80-year-old men sitting around a table in some wooden paneled room with their brandy sniffers and their cigars, sitting around laughing at these poor applicants. What we've tried to do through our staff blogs is show students that there are real human beings reading their applications, human beings who actually care about these students. And in one example of a blog entry that I'm going to show you later, I'll explain this in greater detail. Second, transparency. We try very hard to demystify the admissions and financial aid process because these days applying to college is very, very stressful. And if you help students really understand what's going on every step of the way, it reduces stress and anxiety a great deal. The third thing here, rapid release of information. Put out fires before they start. If you wait to send email or send a print letter in the mail, that takes a long time, especially if someone has to check their spam folder. As we all know, a lot of our email ends up in someone's spam folder, or, as Sam will tell you, a lot of it doesn't but gets junked anyway because they assume it's just more annoying college mail. By posting things on your blog, assuming your readership is pretty loyal and checking your blog regularly, this is a great way to release information quickly and know that your target audience is actually going to receive it. Number 4 here, interactive. Blog entries can be much more focused and adaptive than anything you can do in print. We've found sort of an exponential growth in what students are curious about, and there's no way at this point that we could really address everything in print. So being interactive allows students to ask about what they're really curious about down to the nitty-gritty details, and it allows us to respond to that. Reason number 5, establishing community. We found that it's very important to establish community between the applicant and the institute and between applicants and other applicants. The reason for this being that a lot of our students who are applying to MIT are coming from places where they have friends, but for the most part, they have smaller groups of friends who do the things that they do, and our website has enabled them to connect with a national network of kids who are a lot like them. And so a lot of bonding has gone on our website. And when it comes time, we talked earlier about your yield improving because of this. When it comes time to choose a school where you feel like you already know a bunch of people or a school where you know no one, we've been told by some of our students that they chose MIT because they felt like they already had a family here. Now, of course, we're talking there about student blogs. What's important about staff blogs there is that staff can be really great about helping students to feel a bond with the administration of your school. A lot of students think, what's going to happen when I go there? Will anyone care? Will my advisor completely ignore me? And by being really attentive to the needs of this target audience, they associate us with the administration. I guess technically we are a part of the administration, even though we often like to think of ourselves as kids. We are part of the administration, and the experience that they have with us will set an idea in their head of what it will be like to interact with the administration here at MIT. So establishing that community early really gives students, prospective students, a taste of what it will be like to interact both with current students here and the administration. Point number 6, keep it fresh. Regularity of new content keeps students engaged with your school. We have students who come back to the MIT site every day just to see what's new. That's because we have new entries almost every day. And last but not least, credibility. The target audience finds primary source content to be more real, honest, and credible than standard marketing materials. And they should, because it really is. So to summarize, focus foremost on helping your applicants, not yourself, in your own successful follow. You cannot fake this. Sam Jackson will tell you next week, if you try to fake it, they will know, and they will know very quickly. So make sure your heart is in the right place before you start. A good rule of thumb is think of yourself as a guest on their turf. When I see other marketers go into the web and think that they own the web and they're going to control what happens there, I just have to laugh, because the whole reason we started this blogging program in the first place is because these kids were already blogging, and we thought, well, they pretty much established this. We're just going to go be a guest on their turf, and we're going to be respectful, because otherwise it's not going to work. So that's been our mentality all along, is to act as a guest and be respectful. So what are the risks? I get this question a lot when I present about blogging. I'm not going to lie and say there are no risks. There are risks. But hopefully you'll agree with me that the benefits far outweigh the risks. So what are the risks? First of all, you must allow your colleagues and your student bloggers to post entries directly to the site. Because if you attempt to filter or censor or edit or micromanage any of that stuff, your program's credibility will go out the window. Nancy did a great job last week of talking about this very topic. Credibility depends on bloggers occasionally posting the bad along with the good. Nancy mentioned this in regards to the students. I just want to follow up and say it's true of staff blogging as well. Your staff can't be afraid to say things that aren't necessarily 100% positive all the time. For the same reasons that we encourage our students to post the good with the bad, we encourage our staff to post the good with the bad. It establishes credibility, and it gives the whole picture. And after all, that's really what we're trying to do here, is have students be a part of their own process. Third here, you must trust your prospective students to post appropriate responses directly to the site. The ability to post in real time, in other words, without an administrator approving each comment, is what enables a community to establish itself in your site. Well, we talked before about students getting to know one another through our site. Well, you can imagine if I had to go in and approve every comment with 30,000 comments in the last 2 years, conversations couldn't really happen, because students would constantly be waiting for their comment to be posted, and the whole interactive part would go away. So you have to just open the doors and look at it carefully, frequently, to make sure nothing bad has been posted, but you can't stifle the conversation by requiring approval prior to posting. Fourth here in the risks, helping students and forming relationships with them quickly becomes addictive. You can ask my wife about this, the amount of time that I spend on the computer at night and on weekends, and all the times that I'm really not supposed to be working. This is addictive. It gets to be a lot of fun, and it gets to be really rewarding, and you find yourself on the computer a lot. You'll likely sacrifice a lot of your free time, especially in the first year when you're getting up to speed, because peak times are at night and on weekends, when prospective students are not in school. That's when they tend to be on the web. Blogging is a gateway to other addictions like Facebook and College Confidential. You'll find that when you start blogging that things that you blog about will show up on other sites like Facebook, like College Confidential, like some of the other forums. So you need to sort of follow the conversations into these other places and make sure that whatever you're talking about isn't getting skewed in any way. You want your information to always be correct, and you'll find that Facebook and College Confidential especially have a way of taking good information, and it's sort of like the game of telephone. When it gets posted over and over and over again, eventually it tends to skew a little bit, and you have to go in there and fix it. So blogging is a gateway to other addictions. Last but not least here, the community you establish can be very depressing at certain times of the cycle. Here at MIT, we sadly have to reject 88% of our applicant pool, most of whom are just extraordinary, extraordinary people. And when you've spent the better part of a year developing relationships with them through your blogs, and then you have to reject them, it can be very, very depressing. The relationships that you build with your applicants do not end with the release of decisions. We at MIT spend a significant amount of time counseling students that we've rejected and waitlisted, and helping them understand that not getting into MIT isn't the end of the world. We do this because we started this whole thing to help the students, not to help ourselves, and the release of admissions decisions should never change that. In other words, just because these students have not been admitted to MIT doesn't mean that all of a sudden we've severed the relationship and are never going to talk to them again. That wouldn't be fair, and that certainly wouldn't be nice, so we don't do that. Are the risks worth it? Absolutely. I can honestly tell all of you that I enjoy every facet of my job more because of my experiences working with current and prospective students in the blogosphere. It really is one of the best parts of my job. Actually, it is the best part of my job. So, what will you write about if you start a staff blog? A lot of people are concerned that they'll write a couple of entries and then have no idea what to write about, and their blog will become old and stale. So here are Ben's tips. What will I write about? Try to write about a mix of topics ranging from lighthearted to serious. If you're lighthearted all the time, then there will be no substance in your blog. And if you're serious all the time, then you'll either freak out the kids or depress them and they won't come back. So try to keep it a nice range. Understand the voice of a blog. It needs to be more casual and conversational than other content you produce. Remember that you're treating the blog as if you were sitting in a room with the students. And if you were hopefully sitting in a room with the students, you hopefully would not talk to them like you were a piece of New York Times prose. Hopefully you would talk to them just friendly admissions officer, and that's what you want to do with your blog. Be timely wherever appropriate. You want to keep your applicants in the loop every step of the way. If you had your applicants in a room on any given day, what would you say to them? Start there. That's always a great way to think about starting a new blog entry. And listen to your audience. Your audience will tell you in your blog comments what they want to hear about, what their needs are at given times of the cycle. Pay attention to that. When they ask you questions, when they make suggestions for new entries, don't ignore that. Let that drive your blog. So I'm going to give you some examples here, followed by some of the 30,000 comments. Don't worry, not all the 30,000 comments, but I'll give you examples of both entries and comments. First here we have what I call the question and answer blog entry. You'll find that even in very topical blog entries, students will come out of left field with random admissions questions. So what I do is I keep these in a file when they come in, and then every so often, about once every 2 weeks or once a month, depending on where we are in the cycle, I'll just post an entry with all of the questions that have shown up in my comments and all of the answers. It's pretty straightforward. And here's one comment from my recent Q&A. Thank you for answering all of our questions. You've made me appreciate how much heart really goes into this process. So that was nice. That made me feel like I was really helping students. Next one, the human component. This particular entry was in response to a post that I saw in College Confidential. And I'll read you what the student had posted. The student said, you know, I get sick of college admissions officers saying how they couldn't accept so many wonderful people. While it's supposed to be comforting, obviously, I just find it really insincere. I mean, either you're accepted or you're not. There is no gray area, so they shouldn't try to sugarcoat the harsh reality. So what I did, because I really got hit by this comment, I really wanted to respond to it. So what I ended up doing is writing a whole entry about our entire process and how it works. And I let the students know every step of the way from the time an application enters our office to the time it goes to committee, and then what happens in committee, what happens. And I basically told them how every year I fall in love with several hundred kids that I read. And I'm thinking about all of the things that they're going to do at MIT, and I'm so excited that they're going to be part of the community next year. And then I show up in selection committee and find that all of my colleagues have several hundred kids. And unfortunately, the class size is only 1,000. So clearly the 2,400 or so kids that we are totally excited about, let alone the other 10,000 kids that we are just slightly less excited about. You get the point. So I wrote this whole entry and basically told them that when we say that we're really sad that we don't accept so many wonderful people, we're not just saying that. We're not being insincere. It comes from months and months of reading applications and loving kids and seeing them not get in. It's really heartbreaking for us too. So the responses to this were, institutions often seem cruel, heartless, and decisive, but they are run by human beings. Thank you for bringing that across. And then someone else said, thank you for this entry. No matter what the outcome, I will be pleased that my application even got attention from someone like you. You've really helped relieve the stress in this process. So that was really magical for me to be able to write an entry that helped kids understand that there really were human beings behind this process, and that we really do care about them, whether they're accepted or rejected. Correcting bad information. This was in response to another post somewhere out there where students basically were saying that you need 15 APs to get into MIT, which is absolutely not the case. And some parents actually were discussing this and saying they didn't think it was fair of MIT to have such high demands. We were basically stripping students of their childhood by expecting them to be taking 15 APs, which actually is not the case. So I wrote a whole entry in response to that. I'll just read you one line of it. I said, guys, remember, I work for MIT. If a student doesn't want to be taking a challenging course load in high school, that kid's certainly not going to be happy here. This is a very rigorous academic curriculum. Quite simply, the students who are happiest here at MIT are those who thrive on challenge. Most of our admits have taken AP Math and Science because they would have been bored silly in the regular classes. Indeed, they genuinely wanted to take those classes. They don't look at MIT as the prize. They look at MIT as the logical next step. It's a very important distinction. So being able to write that entry really helps students understand why the traditional profile of a successful MIT applicant includes a lot of APs when they're available. Of course, we look at everything in context, but when APs are available, we like to see that students have taken them because of the challenge component, not because we have these crazy demands on our students. And I got a lot of favorable response to that entry, students saying, wow, I finally understand, I was looking at it the wrong way, so that was great. And then here's a comment. I really appreciate the MIT admissions staff's efforts to make the application process simpler and transparent, and I really like that you frankly disclosed that MIT indeed is above numbers. Now I can get on with the serene application process. Responding to natural disasters, this one is pretty straightforward. When Katrina happened and there were various other hurricanes in Florida that year, I did a blog entry and basically said, we're totally thinking about you guys. We have no demands that, excuse me, you meet our deadlines. If you missed your SAT, we can reschedule it. Don't worry about it. Just trying to help them feel a little more at ease with what was going on. And the response was, thanks for your thoughts and consideration. I must say some other colleges aren't as understanding and still want everything in on time, but don't get me started on that. Thanks for being so understanding and actually caring. Still without power at home, but hey, we're one day closer to getting it back. So that was a very optimistic comment. Putting out fires before they start. This is something I mentioned earlier. And this particular example has to do with our mailing a couple of years ago for early action. They always talk about the big envelope and the small envelope. Our big envelopes, because they weighed more, were sent to a different branch of the postal office somehow. I don't know all the details. What ended up happening, though, is that people who were admitted early got their packets well before people who were deferred or rejected. So people were essentially finding out their admissions decisions based on how long the mail took to get there. And even though this wasn't our fault, this was actually due to a flaw in the postal service that we were using. They blamed us, and rightfully so. If I were an applicant, I'd probably blame us too. So I immediately wrote a blog entry explaining everything that happened. There's no faster way I could have released this information. And just as the fire was beginning to grow, I was able to put it out by telling them the truth. And the response to that was, hey, just wanted to thank you guys at MIT for all the hard work you have done to help correct a problem that wasn't even your fault. And then a student who had actually posted immediately a really mean comment in my blog responded and said, I posted a mean comment before, and I would just like to apologize for my rash and inappropriate comment. I am just extremely frustrated, and I took it out on you and MIT. It was wrong. I realized that you truly care about what happened and care about all of us in general. So that gives you a sense of what an entry like that can do for putting out fires. And last but not least, humor. Humor is one of my favorite things because these students are going through a lot of stress. Anytime I can make them laugh, I try to do that. So one of my favorite entries was, oops, I've gotten ahead of myself. Let me back up. One of my favorite entries was called MIT Idol. I'm a very big American Idol fan myself. So I was sitting there one night thinking of what I could write a blog entry about that would make them laugh, and I decided I was going to see what would happen if Randy, Paula, and Simon were the judges in the selection committee at MIT. So I wrote an entry where Randy said, Dog, it was just all right for me. You want me to keep it real, right? All right, it just didn't work. The curriculum was just too big for you. You should have picked classes that you could have actually passed. And then Paula says, you know what? You're a star. Your handwriting is beautiful. You look great, and I really like you. I'm not sure MIT is the place for you, but you're really going to go far in life and have gorgeous kids and save the world. And then Simon says, when you do math in public, how do people generally react? Is this an application to MIT or to preschool? You are absolutely forgettable. I could go into any middle school and find sixth graders I'd rather admit. And it goes on and on. You can read the whole thing on my blog if you'd like. But I try to be funny once in a while. Often I fail, but I try. And the response to this was, thanks for helping to make waiting a little less stressful. Now that I think about it, March 17th doesn't seem like too far away anymore. So how do we do this at your institution? First of all, start with the big picture. A blogging program must be seen as a priority of the office to be successful. You need time and you need a little bit of money, although not as much money as some people think. But you still have to write these things into your plans. Otherwise, it will get swept under the rug with all the other stuff that we all know we do all year long, like read applications and travel and all other fun stuff. This will ultimately pay for itself, I can promise you that. Boost phone calls and emails, increases in applications and yield, but don't expect overnight results. It will take months, perhaps an entire admissions cycle for students to find and embrace your new community. Second, you have to decide who's going to run your program. This program needs to be managed by someone who's really going to have their finger on its pulse all the time. So you have to decide who will manage the program, and you have to write the responsibilities into his or her or their job descriptions. This person or these people should be given a substantial amount of time to get the program up to speed and to maintain it once it is up and running. Remember that a blog sleeps for no one. And the worst thing you could possibly do is to launch a blog that's very, very cool for about 2 weeks, and then everyone sort of stops posting, and the comments get out of control, and all of a sudden you have a disaster on your hands. So you need to plan to give this a lot of time. Management responsibilities will include establishing the rules of your community and enforcing them. For example, no bad words, no attacking other people. Our big rule at MIT is you can challenge ideas, but don't attack people. Steering threads back on track when they derail. For example, let's say that my American Idol post that I just quoted, all of a sudden people are saying, haha, it's funny, I love American Idol, everything's nice and on topic, and then someone says, I heard that you need a 2400 to get into MIT, and all of a sudden the whole thread becomes about what SAT scores you need. So in situations like that, you need to have someone monitoring it and to go in and say, hey guys, you know, there are right places to talk about what SAT scores you need, but let's get this thread back on track, because I think ultimately students really appreciate when threads stay on topic. You need to monitor reader comments for appropriateness, and note that comments escalate on nights and weekends when prospective students aren't in school. Because of our policy to let students publish in real time, without monitoring them before they go live. We do have to monitor them around the clock because at any time someone could publish something very, very offensive, which has happened once in a while, but not very often. In the 30,000 comments that we've received in the last couple of years, I would say less than 100 had to be deleted, most of the time for bad language, once in a while for posting information that just was completely false. Not necessarily in a mean way, just inaccurate. Timely responses to questions. We talked about this a little bit before. You want to respond to questions quickly, because if you don't, students will grow tired of your blog. They expect to be answered quickly. Let's see. Selection and management of student bloggers and hounding of lazy colleague bloggers. This is a big deal. Nancy talked last week about managing student bloggers. I would say often the staff bloggers need as much management as the student bloggers, simply because, as we know, you get very busy with admissions-related stuff, and all of a sudden you haven't thought about your blog in a while. And there's nothing worse than a blogger that doesn't publish. So I hound my colleagues, some more successfully than others, as you can see from the MIT blogs. And I have to hound myself too. I haven't actually posted in a few weeks, which is terrible, but we won't get into that right now. Content management, pretty self-explanatory, just monitoring all of this content flow. As I said before, we have 2,000 entries and 30,000 comments. That's a significant amount of time to read all of those words, which I do to make sure on a daily basis that everything is okay. Choose your bloggers. My big advice here is to start small. Some folks call me and say, I notice you have 4 staff bloggers and 12 student bloggers. We're going to launch our blog next week with 16 bloggers. We're so excited. And I say to them, wait a minute. If you're just starting for the first time, you don't want to start with 16 bloggers. You want to start with a handful of bloggers and then grow as your program grows and as your resources grow. So we started with 2 staff bloggers and 1 student blogger. Now we have well over 20 with guest authors like faculty and programs like the Study Abroad Office, for example. But this was done incrementally over 3 years. So start small. You don't want to get overwhelmed by the maintenance of a program like this. People always say, well, what if I just don't have any time? The truth is you can start a blogging program without a lot of time if you start small. If you start the way we did with just 2 staff and 1 student blogger, this will not be a humongous demand on your time. It doesn't get to be a huge demand on your time until you start looking at numbers like we have, but we've grown into that over the years, so it's not as bad as it seems. So don't be scared by the time commitment. Remember, it's worth it. Go to my next slide here. So as with your student bloggers, you want to choose staff bloggers who each offer something different, but who complement each other. At MIT, we have me. I tend to be the philosophical one. I focus more on the big picture than on MIT itself, because I think college admissions, generally speaking, is fascinating. So my readership is actually comprised at least a little bit of students who have no intention of ever applying to MIT, but they read my blog because they are interested in college admissions, generally speaking. So that's kind of fun. Matt, who is my sort of partner in crime with this whole project, Matt is an MIT alum, and he is a walking textbook of MIT knowledge. He provides great advice and tips, all of which are inspired by his personal experience as an MIT alum. He's worked in admissions ever since he graduated, so trust me, if anyone knows MIT like the back of his hand, it is Matt McGann. So his blog is excellent. Brian Nance, my other partner in crime, is our Director of Minority Recruitment, and he focuses his entries on issues that affect minority applicants. It's nice to have a few bloggers who are really focused on a particular topic. Our second person in that department is Daniel Barkowitz, who is our Director of Financial Aid, and he focuses almost all of his entries on financial aid topics. So it's nice to have a couple bloggers who sort of cover a wide spectrum of things, and then a couple of bloggers who maybe focus on particular things that you're interested in having discussions about on your website. Financial aid and minority recruitment being 2 big ones for us. Last but not least, guest authors. We talked a little bit about that before. Fourth, you need to select a blogging platform. As Nancy mentioned last week, there are 2 main options here. Option 1 is to host it yourself using software like Movable Type or WordPress. My site, mitadmissions.org, is built using movable type. I believe that Sam Jackson's blog uses WordPress, so maybe he can talk a little bit more about WordPress next week. I just love movable type. I've been using it ever since I started blogging many years ago, way before I ever came to MIT. I think that movable type in WordPress, you'll have people arguing about them the way they argue about Coke versus Pepsi, or Apple versus PC. It really is what you like, what works for you, and what you're used to. So for me, I'd say choose the one that, look at them both and choose the one that you think will work best for you. You can't make a bad decision. It's more flexibility with hosting it yourself, but it requires more time and knowledge to set up and maintain. Option number 2 is to select a third-party host, such as Typepad or Blogger. This is much easier to set up and maintain. You don't have to really know anything, but there's very little flexibility. If you look at our site, mitadmissions.org, the blog content is seamlessly integrated with all of our admissions content. If you're using something like Typepad or Blogger, your blog is going to exist independently of your admissions site, so there won't be as much tie-in with blog content and admissions site content. So there are pros and cons for each of those, and if you have questions about those, you should feel free to email or call me at any time, because I have a lot of experience with both and would be happy to help any of you make a good decision. And last but not least, start blogging. So here's your checklist. Discuss the concept of admissions blogging with your colleagues to determine if it's right for your office, and evaluate whether or not your office can afford the time and budget to blog effectively. Decide who will manage the program and serve as the project lead. Determine distribution of responsibilities, in other words, monitoring comments, entries, responding to questions, etc., etc. Choose your bloggers, select a blogging platform, and set up your blog, and then off you go. So I think we are at the question stage, and I'm glad we had plenty of time for questions, because sometimes I find when presenting that the questions make for the most interesting part of the whole presentation. So
and you're right, Ben. Hey, thank you very much for a great presentation. So I'm going to invite the audience to type their question in the chat interface, and I have a few for you. You know, while everybody is typing theirs. I'd like to know, how many posts do you write on average per week?
The site in general, or me personally?
You personally.
I used to be much better than I am now. I've recently inherited some new job responsibilities, and I sadly have been neglecting my blog, which I feel terrible about. The good news, however, is that traffic tends to be lowest in the summertime. We see September as when the traffic spikes back up. So my goal is to have all of these other projects done by September so I can start blogging regularly again. When I'm doing what I want to be doing, I try to post once a week. My colleague Matt McGann is wonderful about regular posting. He posts generally at least twice a week. Some of my other colleagues less frequently. There's a good balance between, at least for our staff bloggers, between longer infrequent posts and shorter frequent posts. It's really a matter of style, but I would say once a week is probably ideal.
Okay. Next question from Beth. How do you compensate your bloggers? The student one.
The student bloggers. The student bloggers are compensated in cold hard cash. They make $10 an hour, but they are capped at $40 a week, so 4 hours. Many of them choose to blog a lot more than 4 hours a week, but they do not make more money. They just choose to do it for free. So we pay them up to $40 a week, depending on how much work they've done. And the expectation is for one entry and also answering any questions that appear in their comments.
Okay, next question from Stefan. How do you address incorrect information or perceptions that are shared by respondents? Do you face them head-on or simply erase? I think he's mentioning that about the question is about the comments.
Right, that's a great question. It depends where we are. If we are on my blog, then I will definitely pull out the, I don't mean take it down, I will pull out the comment and put it in a new entry so that everybody sees it and say, some of you guys might have seen this post, I just want you to know that that's not correct. Let me give you the correct information there. If I'm on a site like Facebook or College Confidential, I will just respond to the post and say, actually, let me correct that information. Whenever possible, I try to give primary source information. So if they say you need 2,400 to get into MIT, then I will go and say that's not correct, and I will show them statistics that we have on our site showing that that's not correct, and I will also link to a lot of my bloggers' entries where they say what they got on their SATs, none of which was 2,400. So I'm sort of using all sorts of primary source information to correct bad information, because I find that if I just answer it without backing it up, then they say, well, you're paid by MIT to say all the right things. So by using primary source information, I find that it makes it a lot more credible.
Okay, great. Next question from Anthony. Is the admissions department the only office on campus that blogs?
The blogs, the way we do, I would say probably. We have blogging programs set up for classes. A lot of our classes here will use blogs, but they're not really public. Also, a lot of our students have personal blogs that you can find pretty easily by typing in, say, MIT blog into Google. That was actually one of the arguments that I used when selling this idea to the people upstairs. They were a little nervous at first about turning over the website to bloggers, and I simply went to Google and typed in MIT blog, and the first 20 entries or so came up, and I showed them how this is what students were clearly doing, and here was the information they were finding. And in a lot of areas that was bad information or information that was very, very outdated. And I convinced them to let me do this so that we would be the first thing that students found in Google, and it would be correct information. So in terms of official programs, as far as I know, admissions is the only one that's doing it, but we have tried to incorporate as much of the campus as possible. We have guest authors who are faculty members, a variety of other staff members at MIT, student programs who want to do sort of a guest author feature. We encourage that. So the more folks from the MIT community that we can pull in the guest author position, the better we are able to show the spectrum of MIT. So we try to do that as much as possible. Excuse me.
Okay, next question from Ed. Ben, what did you do in the way of promoting the existence of your blogs before they took off? In other words, how did you let people know the blog exists? Also, how would you advise promoting a blog not hosted on your school site?
That's a fantastic question. There are a lot of different ways you can promote your blog. Those of you who have online applications, as we do, there's a pretty big advertisement for the blogs there, because we know that a lot of students come first to our site to look at the application. So if we can steer that traffic to our blogs, that's definitely a helpful thing. We also send a postcard in the mail to everyone on our mailing list that advertises the blogs and explains what they are and how they're helpful in determining whether or not MIT is a good choice for any given applicant. When we go out on the road, we hit about 80 cities every year and see thousands and thousands of kids, and we incorporate mention of the blog into our roadshow, so to speak, by saying things like, and if you want to know more about this, visit mitadmissions.org, where you'll find a variety of blog entries on this very topic, that sort of thing. I also spend a lot of time on other sites like College Confidential and Facebook, and by dropping mention of the blogs into a lot of my posts on those sites, students tend to click through and then discover the blogs that way. But really, the sky's the limit. Any way you can sort of insert the blogs into everything else you're doing, it's good. And I would say having the blog not hosted on your school site really isn't an issue. As long as students know where to go, it doesn't matter whether it's on your site or whether it's somewhere else. If you look at the University of Chicago, for example, which I think is a fantastic blog, they host on Blogger, I think, or on some third party, and they simply link to it from their admissions site, and people don't seem to care at all that it's not on their actual website. So I wouldn't let that stand in your way. You can promote the same way, whether it's on your site or whether it's on someone else's site.
Okay, great. Next question from Anthony. At what point of the admission process do you drive the students to view the admission blogs?
That's a great question, too. We I would say it really depends, because students sign up for our mailing list at different, some people are crazy and sign up like in 8th grade, and other people wait until their senior year to sign up. So in terms of print marketing materials and things like that, it's more up to the student than it is up to us. It depends on when they sign up. In terms of when we actively try to make the students aware of it, I would say that would be beginning with our fall travel in September. And a lot of juniors come to those fall travel sessions. So a lot of juniors are made aware of the blogs at that point. If you look at our audience, very few people are freshmen and sophomores. It's almost entirely juniors and seniors who are interacting with our blogs and interacting with each other.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Brad. Are your readers mostly students, or do you have also parents?
I was surprised actually at how many parents were reading our site. Parents don't tend to comment as much on the blogs, so you're not sure that they're there. But we have a campus preview weekend, which we have in April, where we try to bring all of the admitted students to campus at the same time, and parents come along too. And we had an event, I should say every year we have an event called Meet the Bloggers, which is where you get to meet the students and the staff in real life who have been blogging for you all year. And the first year we did that, it was just so many parents, and all these parents came up to us and said, I've been reading your blog for a year, it's wonderful, it really helped me understand the admissions process, thank you so much. And I said to them, why don't you guys ever post anything? And the common response was, well, we're shy, and we don't want people to know we're here, but we really enjoy reading it. So I would say there are a lot of parents, and we've actually discussed in the office the idea of setting up a new blog that's written by a parent of a current student to help parents of prospective students navigate the process with the help of someone who has been there.
Okay, great idea. Do you think that, are you planning to launch that for September, or is it a more long-term project?
Well, as you know, we've sort of had a leadership change here in the MIT admissions office, and that plan was in discussion, and then that happened, and now a lot of things like that are sort of on hold until we're focusing our attention on sort of more pressing things, figuring out how this year is going to work with some other things. So that's kind of on hold at the moment. But I'm hoping to do it this year. This year would make me really happy if we could launch that this year.
Okay, I just have like another question for you. How many hours do you think, what is the minimal amount of time people need to invest in admission office to get the blogging program started?
That's a good question. It really depends on whether you're doing just students. I believe Nancy's program is just students. They don't have any staff. And I've seen some other programs that are only staff and don't have students. And I imagine that the management and the time commitment is different for each one of those. For us, because we have both students and staff, it's significant when you get to the numbers that we have. But fortunately, it's enough of a priority for this office that they have created a position, which is my position, where basically all I do is oversee communications. And since the website is the bulk of our communications now, because as Sam Jackson will tell you next week, students much prefer communicating over the web than they do getting hundreds of pounds of college mail in their mailbox every other day. So MIT has created a position that lets me really focus on this and push the boundaries of this, which is really nice. In other offices where perhaps there isn't a full-time director of communications, it's a matter of figuring out how much of a priority it is to the office and setting up your number of bloggers based on that. So let's say that you decide you can contribute 10 hours a week to this. If I heard that you had 10 hours a week, I would say, why don't you start with, say, 3 bloggers, 4 bloggers. Keep it small. Don't make it totally fancy. And see how that goes. And if you feel really comfortable with that, then maybe add a few more. But I would say the minimum amount of time would be 5 hours for the person who's overseeing the whole thing. And included in that would be writing an entry. So it doesn't have to be a huge demand on your time. Again, my advice is to start small and see how your office sort of weathers the storm, so to speak, of getting the thing started, and then go from there and grow as you feel comfortable growing.
Okay, no more questions in the audience. I have another one. So if you do have a last question in the audience, I invite you to type it in the chat interface. Just to get an idea how you get the traffic. I don't know if you have the data, Ben, but do you have a lot of traffic from directly from the search engines?
We do actually. We get a lot of traffic from Google. Google seems to be very, very popular. And one thing that's really nice for us is for some reason Google likes my blog, and so we tend to show up pretty high in a lot of searches. I didn't do anything with Google. I didn't call them or anything. I didn't beg or give them my left foot or anything. They just are nice to me and put our site up there. So the number one feeder to our site is certainly the MIT homepage. MIT.edu has a nice link to us. That's the number one source, and from there it tends to be Google searches. We get linked a lot from some of those sites like Facebook and College Confidential. Where else? That's probably pretty much it. Google and the homepage and other sites where students are hanging out.
And can you, or do you have the number of subscribers via RSS? Can you share them, or do you have, I mean, if you have it?
That's a great question. I actually don't have that. That's something I should probably set up, because that would be really interesting. I'm assuming a lot of people read our site through RSS, and that's something that I've never actually considered. So you just gave me a task item.
Okay, next item on your pretty surely very long to-do list. Okay, so I don't see any other question. I'm done with mine. I just want to thank you for a great presentation and a great Q&A, Ben. It was like definitely something very interesting to hear from somebody who manage a blogging program but who is also a blogger. So I'm gonna just move to the next slide, which is a reminder. So our next session with Sam Jackson, 2007 graduate of Phillips Exeter Academy and an excellent student blogger, is scheduled for next Tuesday, July 31st at 1 p.m. Just want to thank everybody for taking part in this webinar, and we'll meet next week.